Was it October 6 years ago? October 6 years ago. A number of us from this church, from the church in Elliott Lake, had the privilege of traveling to Rwanda for 2 weeks through Canadian Baptist Ministries to be involved in a short-term mission trip there. It was a great experience. And while we were there, we were under the charge of these wonderful people whom we met by the names of Bruno and Kathleen Soucy. And it was shortly after that trip 6 years ago that the mission partners that we as a church had, I think they were the Jenks family, retired from the mission field and moved on. And as a church, we were wanting to decide who are we going to support as mission partners out there in the world. And it was natural for us, having just had some experience firsthand with Bruno and Kathleen, to throw our support behind their ministry. At that time, it was Rwanda in Africa, and it was a few years after that God moved them across the world to Bolivia in South America. And so for the last number of years, we as a church have been supporting Bruno and Kathleen Soucy, whether you know it or not. We have been, and I hope you know, and if you didn't know before, you're going to know it today. You've seen their faces before, maybe, because a number of occasions, we had them on the big screen. They joined us live via Skype, so we've seen your faces much bigger than we're going to see them today. But we get you here in person, and we're just so excited that you're here with us, that they have they've gone far out of their way just to be with us here in Blind River this morning, and I'm so thankful that you have. And so you can come up and join us, Bruno and Kathleen, and we'll turn things over to you here. But and by the way, every first Sunday of the month, we take up a communion offering, a second offering, and to go to the support of our mission partners. So if you have been contributing towards that offering on Communion Sundays, this is where it's going, right there. And so in the future, you know that's what that's all about. The Sunday school kids are going to stay here with us this morning, because they're probably going to hear some neat stories about what God is doing in other parts of the world and see some neat pictures. And if we've got some time here at the end, we're going to have opportunity for some Q&A. So if as they're speaking, there's some question that presents itself to your mind, remember that, and maybe you'll have opportunity to, and even you kids, if there's a question that comes to your mind, we'll have opportunity to ask Bruno and Kathleen there that at the end. So let's welcome them to our church.
Okay, I think I'm on. Yes, well, thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful welcome. And if you haven't known about supporting us, we just want to say again how great it's been to be supported by the church. And I was just sharing with someone else a little earlier, our home church from Moncton, New Brunswick, where's our, yes, hello, there's our fellow Maritimer, is our number one church supporter, and they have been over the years, as it should be, as our sending church. But your church here in Blind River is our second church in terms of the financial support that we receive. So you need to know that. It's been significant for us, and it's been a real joy to be able to be Skyped into some of your services in the past, and the first time we've been able to be in your new space. So this is great, and what a blessing that must be to the church to be here in this space. So thank you so much for the time that we get to spend with you this morning. And I just wanted to, before I hand it over to Bruno, take a few minutes just to tell you a little bit about who we are and how we've ended up where we've been. So Bruno and I began, it was in 2006, our journey with CBM, and we both left professional work, and at the time we had been living 10 years in New Brunswick, and we both are agrologists by profession, and I've been working in nonprofit work for a number of years in addition to that. And so, I think that idea that we're, God calls us to serve him wherever we are, and the idea of moving halfway around the world to do that was really not in my repertoire, in my thinking, but it was in Bruno's. And so we did eventually end up on the same page with that. And when we started to look at what was the work that our Baptist friends are doing in the world, and that drew us to find out a little bit more about Canadian Baptist Ministries and the work that they do. So CBM is the missional arm of the Baptist churches in Canada. And they work in 14 different countries. And certainly there are several in East Africa. We had the privilege of serving in Rwanda for 7 years as global field staff there. And now in Latin America, where we have the longest, next to India, the longest partnership of over 120 years in Bolivia. And I know some of you here have also been to Bolivia. So it's been a real privilege for us to be there. We're now working as the Latin America team leaders for CBM, and we're living in Bolivia because that is where we have the largest concentration of projects, programs, and staff. But we also have work in Cuba, in El Salvador, and a little bit in Nicaragua. So we're on a fast track of learning, and not the least of which has been working in another language. In Rwanda, we were able to speak French, and we never did learn the local language, but beyond being able to do simple things. But in Bolivia and Latin America, of course, it's not an option. You have to be able to function in Spanish. So that's been a real focus of our work this past year. We've been there for 1 year. And so the distinctives of CBM and really how we work is through the invitation of local churches. So we do not come into a country and set up shop and say, well, we're here as Baptists and how can we help? So it's really been, it is a distinctive of how we work, and it's certainly, we're there to respect our local church partners, what they're doing, what their mission is, how they're living out their faith in where they are, and that we can be able to come alongside and share in that. So our hope is that we will be sharing God's love through word and deed. And Bruno's going to be speaking about that. One thing I wanted to mention is that we work in a team there in Bolivia, and we have a wonderful young couple by the name of Tim and Callie Hutton that have just started to work with us, and they're going to be accompanying our programs. And Callie is a youth pastor, and her husband is a librarian, and they are both very talented young people. We have David and Susanna Nacho, who provide theological support in not just Bolivia, but Latin America as well. And David's work around church discipleship, basically those are the programs that he's engaged in training people and training trainers to support churches. What does it mean to love God, serve in your community? What does it mean in our family, especially when there's so much domestic violence and other issues that are everywhere in the world? So their work has been very integral to a lot of the great things that are happening in Latin America. We also have a Patricia Nacho, who is looks after, she's a national staff Bolivian woman who looks after all the short-term mission trips in Bolivia. So that's who we are there. And so sharing God's love through word and deed. And Bruno is going to talk a little bit about that.
What I'd like to do is just share a couple passages, and hopefully you'll see where we're coming from with that. That'll help you understand why we work the way we do, and also why Kathleen and I have chosen to do this work. First passage, basically we talk about integral mission, and somehow we talk about it as if we've discovered a new thing, this integral mission. And I say, well, you know what? It may be new in our application, but if you read James chapter 2, it's pretty clear to me that faith and works go together. And so I just want to provide a little bit of the biblical basis or biblical background on what that is. And there are many passages. One of my favorite ones is in Isaiah 58. And Isaiah is addressing the people of God, and he's basically saying, if you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, Then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. And there's another passage in Matthew that I just want to go through quickly as well, which again, this is a recurring theme. It's not as if the prophet spoke it, that's done, let's move on. It's a recurring kind of thing, and I think it's an essential piece of who we are as people of God and who we are as church communities. You remember, there's several passages, but there's one in Matthew 25 where it talks about the sheep and the goats. And at times I've thought, a lot of our development programs, we give out goats. And I thought, if we were really biblical, we should give out sheep. But anyway, this talks about the judgment and the sheep and the goats going to either side. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on the glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He put the sheep on the right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick in prison and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." And the inverse is those who didn't feed the poor and look after the sick get condemnation. Sometimes we think the work of the church, and this is an issue that it's an issue that we need to deal with in the Bolivian church and in many parts of the world, where somehow, up until the 1980s, often the evangelical church preached that the real work of the church is evangelism and worship, and all the other stuff is not really our business. And so when we talk word and deed, and we talk James chapter 2, your faith is a demonstration, is demonstrated and supported by your works. How do we live that as a church community? And that's been a challenge. And I really believe that the task of integral mission, like the word and deed, the faith and works being together, is given to the local church. And that's part of the major part why we work through local churches. And those of you involved in church leadership or participation in activities at a church, you know it's messy, right? There's times if you wanted to do something, it would probably be less grief if you just left the church out of it. But God's mandate is we work through the church. We are the church. We are the community. And the work of God happens through us as a community. And so that's really an important piece of why we do what we do and the way we do it. There's a definition of integral mission that I really like. It comes from the Micah Challenge folks, and you're probably familiar with the passage in Micah 6:8. It says, what does God require of us? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And the definition that comes out of that organization as far as integral mission is the one that we use in our work. And it's basically integral mission or holistic transformation is the proclamation and the demonstration of the gospel. It's not simply that evangelism and social involvement are to be done alongside each other. Rather, in integral mission, our proclamation has social consequences as we call people to love and repentance in all areas of life. And our social involvement has evangelistic consequences as we bear witness to the transforming grace of Jesus Christ. And as in the life of Jesus, being, doing, and saying are at the heart of that integral task that we have. not sure if I'm keeping up on the slides here, but I just, Rusty said you're quite informal as a group, so maybe I can just do it that way. The couple of examples of integral mission, we spend a lot of energy trying to get the local churches to move in that direction, and it's really encouraging because a number of churches where we've never done any training, they've just read the Bible and somehow they've figured it out, imagine. This is a community called Opukeri. It's way out, 2 hours out in the desert flats. It's a community where the economics are a little tough, so all the youth have moved away. And in Bolivian society, typically families look after their old folks. That's just the way they do it. In this community, there are no young people. The only people who still live there are old folks. And so it's tough. And so what the church has done is basically opened up a daycare for old folks. And it's really awesome because it's not just their church community as well. And that's always a challenge because, especially with the poor, when you have limited resources, typically you say, we'll look after our own and you guys outside the walls, figure it out. And so they run a day program for old folks in that community. There's about 40 people that show up. They get snacks and they get lunch and they get another snack and they hang out. There's even beds where they can rest and spend time together. And what we're doing is we've kind of discovered these guys were already doing stuff, and it's always neat when you see people doing stuff. And we had a friend in Africa, Sam Mutisia, and he talked about when the wheel is moving, the wheel's already rolling, and you come along and give it a small push. And so that's what we're doing here. We're giving it a small push. The wheel's already turning. So with some investment from us, they'll be able to gear up their center to accommodate. Some of the older folks are very vulnerable because they have huge needs. They'll actually be able to live in that old folks' home, which is not. They don't do that in Bolivia. For us, it's common in our society, but in Bolivia that doesn't happen. So there's a huge need, and that's what's going to be happening. I think a couple. I just want to talk about another example of integral mission happening on their own. Local two young women, university students, are living. They're members of one of our churches in Sucre, and they see kids come home from school. Often the schools run in the morning or the afternoon, but regardless, the kids are vulnerable because, again, in Bolivian society, typically the work day goes from 8:30 in the morning until 7 or 8 at night, and we usually with a break in the middle. But so the kids are home from school alone for several hours, and these two young women said, we got to do something for our kids, and so they started. I call it Sunday school on Thursday nights, and they do homework help, and they provide support and counseling to some of these kids. And so again, the enhancement that we will do with this programming is give them a little bit of equipment, so some tables and chairs so they can do the homework a little bit better, and they'll also, by doing that, we get the rest of the church people out of these two young women to be more active in the whole programming, and they'll run the program 2 days a week instead of just 1 day a week. So it's really, really cool to see things happen that way. Take the next one, please.
Okay, so we just thought we'd take a few minutes to talk a little bit about some of the programs that are going on down in Bolivia that have been, these again are initiated through our church partner there, which is the Union of Bolivian Baptist Churches. And one of the programs is the Casa de la Amistad. And what the reality, I think, is how is the church reaching out to the reality of the needs in Bolivia? And in the cities, there are prisons, and in the prisons are families. Unlike here, if you're incarcerated, especially if it's a man that's in prison, his wife can live with him in the prison. And they do that because they want to protect their marriage. And so the women come and live with the men in the prisons. And of course, the children are extremely vulnerable as a result of that, and they come and live in this prison as well. So the Casa de l'Amistad has been around forever, and it supplies a safe place for kids to come before and after school. They get fed, not just food, but spiritual food. They're given a home and consistency and stability. They're given resources so that they can go to school. And they also help to work with the families as well, because there are many issues there. So things have changed a lot in Bolivia. The law has changed now because children are very vulnerable in this situation, as you can imagine. Now children under the age of 7 only can live in the prison. If you're over 7, you've got to go somewhere else. And so apparently, here you just can't imagine having children living in a prison environment. But there they feel it's just awful. You're separating families for years. And then again, how many of the women that are in the prisons, they cut hair, they cook food, they make money because you have to pay to live in there. But it's a horrible place to be. So these young people that now can no longer live in the prison, the parents have had to find other options for them. And so it's created an extra stress on the ministry of the Casa de l'Amistad. One thing, as Bruno was mentioning, it's the work of the local church. And to think that we'd have to work hard at this. CBM has supported these programs for many years, but where's the local church? And so we've had to work hard to see that there are local churches that are very involved and engaged in these ministries. And I think in the past, off and on, it's been the case, but so today there are, and it's something that we're able to as well bring Canadians into that as well. So together with the CASA, we have other ministry to vulnerable children. There are a number of kids that work. It's legal for children to work in Bolivia, and while they may go to school in the morning, all their other waking time is shining shoes, working alongside their parents in their parents' place of work. And so we have another project called Gire, which is solely, it's supported through CBM, but there is a very dynamic local church that is a very young church, but they support this ministry to young people and to their families as well. So it's huge. So these are kids that work in the various selling things, and it keeps them out of trouble. It allows them resources to go to school, and it also gives them a very strong spiritual component in their life that has had impact on their families as well. The other program that we have in Bolivia, and you've probably heard of some of these things because I know you're faithful CBM people, but there's a disease called Chagas, and it is endemic in Bolivia, and meaning that it's everywhere, and it's carried by, this disease is carried, it's a parasite, and it's carried in the Vinchuga beetle, which is a bug CBM is one of the few that is actually doing more of an inclusive work around this. The beautiful thing about this project is that there's more to life than just having a clean, safe home. We're working with people in our local churches that feel that, you know, people need to have good nutrition. They need to be able to have an income. So how are they going to do that? And so the work that as we're expanding this work, and Bruno and I, of course, are just a little bit excited about this part, but working on improving agricultural methods, so irrigation, how to help families make a livelihood from, there's a demand for organically grown eggs, believe it or not. And so those types of things, we've been able to support people to invest in that so that they can have a decent livelihood. That is, there's a mom and her child and their bean production, but there you can see what the adobe looks like for those of you guys that don't know what adobe is. And it's just bricks that are built out of the mud. And that's a very happy home for a Ventuga beetle that can cause terrible damage. And so many of the families that we deal with, everybody is infected. And it's a huge issue to be able to get people treated and help them through that part. So this work has the privilege we have of being able to work alongside of our friends allows us to engage our Canadian churches, because while we're partnering with local churches in Bolivia, we want to bring Canadians into that experience. And so how do we learn what life and faith, what does living out your faith, what does that look like in another culture very differently from your own? And so we get to do these fun jobs together. And I think I've done it enough times now that I feel I don't really need that experience anymore. No, it's more than just filling holes in the walls. You get to spend time with the family. There's always children around, the community, and the most important thing, it's been a huge opportunity for us to support the local churches in Bolivia, many of whom are kind of divorced from reaching out into their community. It's very easy to be in your church and serving in your church and not to be outward thinking. And so all these people in this picture, this young woman is actually, it's her home. This young woman lives there with her family. And some of the other people are university students that came to help. They're from a local church. And a pastor is there as well. And then our Canadian pastor was also there. So all these people getting together, working together, nobody necessarily understands everything that's being said, but it was amazing experience. And I know for some of you who have had this experience in Rwanda and other places through your travels, have a bit of a sense of what that's like. But the beauty for us is that it really allows us to be able to build into the life of the local churches there, and that's been something that we've seen change over time. Yeah, I just had to get a picture of Bruno in there because he actually has had this experience as well. I think there's a couple of other pictures in there. That was a little blurry. So this is a shot of, in Bolivia we have a lot of indigenous people, so the Aymara and Quechua people, and they don't speak Spanish. And they tend to be very marginalized, and they're the ones that are living in the most poverty. And so this is a church that is reaching out to their local indigenous communities, and that's where we do much of this Chagas work. So bringing the churches together and worshiping together and supporting small missions in other local communities, we get to be a part of all that. I think we have a couple more shots there. Oh, just keep going quickly there. So this is, yeah, we're just spinning, like this is some more kid shots of just some of the children that we've, when you're not plastering houses, we're witnessing to kids and their parents, and they're learning that people love them, even if they don't live anywhere near them. So we had a little story about sheep and goats, but I put this in here because it's always fun to kind of see the sort of things that you come across in Bolivia. And when we passed this, I hung out the window and took the picture, and I said, I think those are sheep up there. And Bruno goes, yeah. I said, they got to be dead. And he goes, no, they're alive. And I said, they got to be tied up there. Anyway, they're obviously coming in for, I think, a market experience, but I thought that was a pretty funny shot. And the next picture is the realities of, it is a joy and a privilege to be able to serve. The challenges do happen. And this is the fellow who manages the Chagas project who is with us. I think, there we go. And anyway, what happened was we drove into this community in the morning, and when we went to drive back, this whole side of the embankment, this big boulder fell down, and needless to say, he was not able to push it out of the way. We ended up, we were backed up, and I thought we could get our vehicle around that if we really wanted to, but our Bolivian host said, no, we cannot go until everybody can get by. So we ended up having to dig out the side of the cliff so that all the cars and people could get by. But it was a great experience bringing us all together. But just that, I just thought that was a good picture to show you about some of the challenges that we've had to face there. So,
Just want to talk a bit about, just give you a bit of a background on what we're doing and why, and some of the projects that are ongoing. But I get far more excited about looking forward than looking back. And Bolivia is kind of a unique spot in the sense that like the Baptist Church in Bolivia exists from Canadian Baptists. Like when the Canadian Baptists went there were very few evangelicals and certainly no Baptists. So it's a 120-year history, which is a really cool thing. It's, at times it's also a bit of a burden because we have to be responsive to our Canadian constituency. There's hundreds of Canadians who have worked as missionaries in Bolivia over the years. At one time, there were 25 Canadian missionaries in Bolivia. So all the pastors, when they started, all the pastors were Canadian. Eventually, Bolivian pastors took on the work, but they were paid by Canadians. And that causes issues as well. And eventually, that's been turned over entirely to the Bolivian church. So the history is there. But just to talk about some of the things, like in one of the communities where we're involved in the Chagas program, in the past, often the development group, remember we talked about the works and the deeds or the words and the deeds are separate. So the church does their evangelism and worship, and the NGO, the development organization, does good work. And in our mind, integral mission means not that we have Christians doing good works, but that we have Christians who are part of the church community who are affecting their own community, and that's integral mission. And so in this case, we're very intentional about hiring an evangelist with the project. So the Chagas project went to a community. Part of the development team is an evangelist. That's his work. He accompanies the folks who go and work on the houses, and they've established a new church in that community based on that effort. And so that's part of the thinking, is that to be very intentional about, sometimes God does stuff without us really thinking about it, but I think more often than not, we need to be thinking how can we have impact, and how can we affect the kingdom with the work that we're doing. And that's an example. There's the whole church piece is a distinctive of how we work, and like I said, sometimes it introduces another element of messiness, because you work with people, and you know what happens when you work with people. Things are not always smooth. And so, but that's the exciting part. This is a small group in Cuba. It's very exciting what's happening in Cuba. As an organization, we've been there for about 5 years now, working with a partner. It's called the Federation of Baptist Churches, which is a break off from the Southern Baptist type denominations that were there. This one is it's a fraternity, so it's not a denomination in that sense. So there's a fair variability in the theological position of some of the folks, from very conservative to fairly liberal. but they're doing a lot of good things together. And my concept of the church in Bolivia, which wasn't right, but thinking the church has been repressed, has been under a communist system for how many years, at some points was actually illegal, that's got to be really small and just barely hanging on by its fingernails. And that's not true. It's amazing. And I think part of how I've tried to rationalize it is that when your faith costs you something, so you say, I'm a Christian, that's going to cost you. Then your commitment to that faith, I think, is much larger than us, that we have so much freedom that sometimes I think we're very casual about our position and our faith. A lot of house churches, this one's in El Salvador, but again, small works, and people, there are huge cathedrals and big buildings, but there's a lot of people doing church in the sense of how I see church, which is Christians in a community who want to do things and who want to bring outsiders in to understand the gospel and have changed lives on account of their communication and their being in community with people who know Christ. Again, Cubans, the music is awesome. Like, it just seems like song breaks out at any moment, and they just do their thing. And again, it's just amazing, and we're really excited about the possibilities. There's a tradition. Bolivia especially has had a very long, at one time, Catholicism was the only religion allowed. And so there's all the beautiful buildings and the cathedrals. But there's also a moving away from the Catholic faith to some degree. It used to be the state religion. It's not anymore. And in fact, at times the church has grief from the current government. And we get, as evangelicals, we get caught up in that a little bit as well. So, do you want to talk about STLs? Okay. Just to talk a bit about going forward again. The whole thing around short-term missions, it's been, we have a Bolivian staff, and it's really a focus of Kathleen's as well, as to accompany that piece. We really believe that short-term missions do good for the communities where we work. So you get to participate in building houses and in talking to kids and doing workshops for pastors and those sorts of things. But really, what we're trying to do, equally important as what good you might do in a community, is what good the experience might do for you in provoking hearts and minds being affected here. Because when we think about the Great Commission, go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the outermost parts. We're kind of in the outermost parts, but in your Jerusalem, there are people who have needs. And so if we can help you understand how big God is a little better than you did before you had this experience, and even maybe pique your consciousness about who's my community. And we all know that even if everybody lives in suburbia, there are needs and there are people hurting, and it's an opportunity for us as believers to affect lives of others and bring them into our community. So that's a big part of the experience of short-term missions, why we do it and why we think it's so important. A moment from Cuba. We thought we were back in Africa for a minute. Our heart is still in Rwanda to some degree. So, but there's lots of people of African descent in the Caribbean, including Cuba. Really excited about El Salvador. At some point we might talk about our journey, but for me personally, the El Salvador experience was kind of the tipping point for saying, this is the kind of work I'm supposed to be doing. And so we're really excited about possibilities in El Salvador. The church there, again, is very dynamic. And again, people whose faith has cost them. Not so much from religious oppression, but the whole society has been in war for many years, in the early 80s. And now the country is actually mostly run by gangs. So it's a dangerous place to be, and the church seems to be the way that you can affect change in a culture and in a society. So anyway, we're really excited about possibilities in El Salvador. Just to finish up with that, and you see a little bit of agriculture down there. You guys don't know, but from the East Coast, in my other life, I spent a lot of time financing salmon farms, and so when I saw the trout farm in Lake Titicaca, this is the highest lake in the world.
In Bolivia.
In Bolivia. It's over 4,000 meters up there. But anyway, it's a pretty cool place.
So we've kind of taken you all over the place, really. But we're really very focused. And I think those last pictures of the churches, it hit me because we've been in cathedrals, we've been in churches, First Baptist Church in Cuba, the First Baptist Church in El Salvador, the First Baptist Church in Bolivia. We've been in the church that's down the road in a woman's home, and somehow we all seem to come together to want to work out our faith and learn how to love God and love others. So we're, again, very privileged to be in this position to be able to support people working in this area, to encourage partnerships with our Canadian church constituency, which we have a real passion for, and then for ourselves, just to every day be, God speaks into our lives each day, and we really feel very confident in being in the right place. For us, the commitment of our Canadian churches and the support we have, we know it's we are an extension of the Baptist churches in Canada, and so we're very excited about things that we can be doing in the future. There's huge in Bolivia. I'm very looking forward to getting involved in what the women are doing. In Cuba, do you know that more than half of the pastors in Cuba are women? And we know that in many, many areas, women are the ones that are working at the grassroots level in the church and in the community. So it's very exciting to be a part of that. So there are many areas for us to be able to connect and learn from one another and grow in our faith and in our walk with God. So we want to thank you so much for the prayer support that we have felt, for your great pastor that has been intentional about bringing us in to your church and having us be a part of you here in some way. And so for those things, we have a number of churches over the years that have supported us, and they've all been very special to us. And knowing that we are covered in that prayer support, I know you can't possibly know all of the things, and we can't really express it all, but God thankfully does have that in control, and but we certainly covet your prayers, and want to thank you so much. And hopefully just this little bit of time as we go forward, we want to really just put the challenge out there that maybe in the next few years you might consider coming to see us. It's not lost on us that we began this journey in Africa, and now you are with us in Latin America, and whatever country that might be, that we would just have an invitation to have you consider putting together a short-term team. We've had families, we've had youth, we've had seniors, we've had all kinds of people from all different walks of life, and we know that can be a blessing in your church as well. So we just open an invitation there for you to pursue that, and we'd love to talk about anybody a little bit more about that if you wish when we have some time during the lunch. But I just thank you so much. Thank you for loving us and for supporting us, and for those of you who are new this morning, you've come to a great church that definitely has a heart for their neighbors near and far. So may God bless you as you minister here in Blind River, a place that we've never been before. But it's wonderful to be here with you. So
we're good with the questions. If they're too hard, we'll just say we can't answer that.
Well, let's take a couple of minutes here while we've got you. We want to get the most out of you that we can. So there's a question you want to ask for a real live missionary, this is your opportunity. You don't get that chance very often. Anybody else? If there's anyone who has a question, I'll run the mic to you.
Where where did you do all this at? Like what country?
So what countries?
And maybe so the kids can understand what part of the world that is, because they don't
Okay.
have good geography.
You know what? The whole map thing, every good missionary should start with a map. So
And then with a sunset.
we've really failed there. So, if you can think of, we live in North America, okay? So Canada and the United States are in North America. And then just below us is Central America. And then further down is South America. And it's down in South America. So, okay, Bruno, point that out. That's where Bolivia is. And so, do you know what? We've just finished the winter in South America, so we are going into the summer months while you guys are going in the other direction. But I won't say anything more about that because we know what happened here last winter. So yeah, we're in, and of course before that, when we talked about Rwanda, that's in Africa. So Bruno, can you find, okay.
It's over there.
It's on the other side of the world. If we could, can our tech support people please just rotate the world a little bit? So it's on the other side of the ocean. So yeah, so it's really, you know, we're actually in the same time zone as you are here. We have this, our clock is, right now it's the same time, it's 11:25 and where I live in Cochabamba. However, it's very far and it's very high. The altitude where we live is around 2,700 meters. And how do we relate that to here? You get a headache, you get out of breath.
But you get used to it.
You get used to it, yeah. She's here from
Someone other than Radin? We're not gonna deny you, okay?
Do you go to different farms?
Go to farms.
I don't know if you noticed, Kathleen and I love agriculture, so we have an event that way. And that's okay, because I believe that God uses your heart and your talents to serve. He's not obligated to, but I think often we do that. In our context, it helps because many of our churches are in rural areas where people, that's what they do to make a living, is farm. So if we can help enhance how they make a living, then that has real benefits for the church community as well. Some of our programming, especially in Bolivia, it's much more urban than some other parts of the world. So in fact, being poor in a city is pretty tough as well. And so a lot of our programming in Bolivia is actually, like we said, with the prison kids, but there's also street kids who, I shouldn't say they're not street kids, they have families, but they work on the street. So they sell stuff and they shine shoes and they do things. And those kids are very vulnerable as well. So that's part of our programming and one of the other programs that we work with the church, where they bring those kids in, they help them with homework so they can succeed at school, they feed them, they give them some Christian principles around how their life could be different if they serve Jesus, and then affecting the families as well, because certainly Bolivia, Rwanda too, I think a lot of places, and maybe we're just more quiet about it here, but family violence is a huge, huge issue. And somehow it seems that the church is only marginally different than the rest of society. So the whole thing of violence in the family is a huge, huge issue. And there are a lot of kids who are on the street because it's actually safer on the street than being home. So there's lots of ways for people who love God and love one another.